The director of sports here at 95.7 The Game has put a poll up on our Twitter feed. Would you like to hear what it is?
Lucas Alexander?
Sure did.
The DOS?
Well, and then you can all weigh in on this. I think this is a very healthy discussion point for today. 888-957-9570. Your calls on this. If you had to choose one of the following three options for the Warriors offseason, what would you choose? Choice 1, big game hunting, bring in an all-star. Choice 2, run it back. Choice 3, Kuminga time. In other words, start the rebuild and develop the young players. So choice 1, all-star. Choice 2, run it back. Choice 3, go young. What would you choose?
I would choose choice 1. And I don't know how you go about doing that. That feels to me to be the most difficult choice because a couple of different things would have to happen. Either, one, somebody would have to take Chris Paul's $30 million contract off your hands in a multi-team deal, or you'd have to be able to trade Andrew Wiggins and Chris Paul, or Wiggins in pieces. Either way, you're going to have to move a lot to really go, quote, big game hunting. And I don't think any of the big game that you can bring in, none of them are flawless. I do think that Kevin Durant, in a short period of time and the contract that he has that you won't need to extend, he's probably the best route to go. If you're looking for big game, Paul George would be great, but it's a 4-year deal. You're going to have to probably give him. Jimmy Butler's exciting, but maybe too exciting with the dynamic relationship between he and Draymond. I'm out on Brandon Ingram, and we can get down to the Lauri Markkanens and of the world. I don't think that he's going to be on the table. I would love for them to get Lauri Markkanen, but I don't think that he's going to be made available. I think that they're going to eventually extend him here by July 1st. So of all the big game, I'm kind of with you on the Kevin Durant part of it based on contract, fit, and excitement level altogether.
I am definitely also choice 1. I will share with you in just a moment what our current polling results are. We're only about 300 or 400 votes in, but I can tell you how it's polling. It very much tells a story. You brought up Paul George. Monty Poole said to us yesterday the Warriors would definitely be interested.
The Warriors would have interest in Paul George for sure. And if Paul decides that he wants to sign a contract and therefore be available in trade, the Warriors are definitely going to look at that. What player who's going to be a free agent is more attractive than Paul, would be more attractive than Paul George? Be available, I should say, in any way, shape, any way, trade or free agency. And that's why I think the Warriors would look at him. He's a two-way player, defense, offense. He's versatile. He can play 3 positions, guard 3 positions. So they would be interested in him. Now, the chances of that happening, I'd still say at this point it's a long shot, but I would not rule it out because the Warriors would be very aggressive if he becomes available.
Okay, that's from Monty Poole, NBC Sports Barry, on our show yesterday. I want to reiterate the question, 888-957-9570. Which of these 3 choices would you choose for the Warriors offseason? Choice 1, bring in an all-star. Choice 2, run it back. Choice 3, go young, Kuminga time. You can go ahead and call in on that. We'll take your phone calls. Listen to this story, and I'll tell you why it matters. Even though no front office, if they're worth a salt, ever takes fan opinion and then acts solely on that. It does matter sometimes. I'll explain. Listen to this. Right now, of all the votes coming in, 75% say choice 1, bring in an all-star. Furthermore, of the remaining 25%, 20 of it goes to go young, Kuminga time. Only 5% of respondents, and I can only imagine that they just accidentally touched that button, only 5% of respondents say run it back. Here's why that matters. That does not matter in terms of if I am Mike Dunleavy, Joe Lacob, and Steve Kerr, and the rest of the group. It does not matter in terms of basketball. I'm not going to listen to Twitter and the fan base if I've got basketball decisions to make. But I think this offseason is about basketball and business. And the business side of it, you have to listen to your customers. You have to know what is interesting to them at a certain point. And when we get a healthy number of votes coming in, and you see that, and again, this is just Twitter, so I'm not taking this as gospel, but But in this particular example, we're getting 1 out of every 20 Warriors fan is saying, I like the idea of run it back, which was sort of the concept from Bob Fitzgerald last week, which is the Warriors are good now.
Yep.
Draymond Green, stay on the court, and this team can compete with anybody in the West. The run it back idea, I think, is very unpopular.
Seems like it.
So when that comes to ticket sales and driving interest and eyeballs and buzz and social media, you got to take that into account. The fan base does not like that idea right now at all.
Yeah, they don't. And I also am a little bit cautious about the poll, and this is no disrespect to the director of sports, Lucas Alexander, but go big game hunting, bring in an all-star. That's an easy thing to sign up for. Now, go big game hunting, bring in an all-star is going to involve what? And if it involves Kuminga being gone and Moody and Looney and a couple of picks or whatever that package is, I do think that the go big game hunting response becomes a little bit more complicated. It becomes a little bit more difficult to sign up for that. With these three options, for me, run it back is the second choice. I would rank these in order of them being listed. I don't want to rebuild and turn the keys over to Kuminga. Rebuild to me would be you're trading Draymond, you're trading Wiggins, maybe you're even trading Steph Curry. If you're really going to turn the keys over to Kuminga and the young guys, well, if you're going to rebuild, then you're going to be like the Thunder when they traded Paul George, and you're going to get back a player and a bunch of picks, and you're going to trade Westbrook, and you're going to trade, Kevin Durant. You're going to make all these big trades for future picks. That's what a rebuild is. So I would rather run it back than totally get into a rebuild, but I'm with you about even the run it back idea. I'm not of the mind that they were just a few bad breaks and a few games away from being really good.
I'm with you. They got to get better. And I love what you said also about the rebuild concept. And I this is just the kind of fan I am. I think rebuild is a cuss word. I really do. We live in San Francisco. Rebuilding, I know people go, oh, look at San Antonio. That's San Antonio. That's San Antonio, Texas. I don't even know if it's one of the two biggest cities in their state. Like, when I look at the way teams operate, how many major market, very recently accomplished organizations go into full rebuild mode? I mean, maybe you make a decision here or there that is based on that. I'll give an example. You saw the way Dallas tanked the last 2 games of the year last year because they're like, let's get a pick, because they didn't like where they were sitting. But they ended up in the NBA Finals a year later. They didn't rebuild. They made a couple of moves, and they reloaded. I've always been against this idea with the Giants. Hell, play the kids. Get rid of everybody. I don't like it. I'm sorry. I don't like it. 49ers, where it's not even a relevant conversation right now. They got the best roster in the game. These teams should almost never, I won't put it in ink, but almost never should that be the plan. Rebuild. Because you are allowed to reload or develop or all of the things that you're always doing anyway. You're allowed to do that on the fly. It doesn't mean, so you're not going to compete for a title every year. But this idea of sell off everything, strip it down, go down, be crappy for 5 to 7 years, good Lord, no. Are any of you looking at the Spurs right now with envy just because they have Wembanyama?
I was just going to point that out, Mark. How's that working out for you? Because the last time you were in the playoffs was 2018, 2019.
Jesus, this is awful.
5 straight years, no playoffs, including back-to-back 22 and 60 campaigns. Yes, you've got Wembanyama.
So what?
And you've got so what? There's a little Fitz in there for you.
No, but seriously, like
somebody, good solid Bobby Fitz, so what?
Somebody who couldn't buy beer the last time the Spurs made the playoffs just had a baby. Like, for God's sakes, what are we doing here?
Can I ask you guys a question?
Go ahead.
You're a fan of a basketball team.
Yes.
Which roster would you rather have? The San Antonio Spurs roster or the Golden State Warriors roster?
Right now?
Currently, right now.
The Warriors. You're all excited about one player, and I get it. That's phenomenal. He's going to be a big deal. But like the run that the Spurs have just taken their fans through, I don't ever want to experience it ever. I do not care. I do not want 6 years of winning a quarter of the games.
And that makes sense, but presumably they're through the worst part of it now.
Right, but that also doesn't always even work out that way. Like you can go through your 5-year run of awful play and not get Victor Wembanyama. You can just be like, whoops, we got the 3rd pick in the draft and we took Darko. I mean, no, I'm just out on that concept. It's one of the reasons I'm so comfortable with Joe Lacob as the owner. I think he's allergic to this conversation. Rebuild. Out. 100% of the time. Out.
Well, if you were going to rebuild and it took 5 years, a la San Antonio, and they haven't even emerged from it, it's goodbye Steph and Draymond, it's goodbye Wiggins, it's goodbye everybody, to be honest, unless you want to give Kuminga the contract that Jordan Poole got, which I was looking at it earlier. That was $35 a year. He got $35 million a year to sign and then be dealt. So that's what you're looking at for Kuminga. So yeah, you want Kuminga to be the centerpiece and you're going to give him 35 or so million a year and you're going to keep all these other guys. And in 5 years, you're going to have to pay them all again. If you decide at that point you're ready to be good.
Let's go to the phones. Nick in the city. Hey, Nick, you're on with Willard and Dibs. What's up?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.
I don't think I think he's a smart guy, and I don't think Lacob's going to do us like the Browns or the Jets and just go into full rebuild. Because that would justify, first of all, having $10 tickets, and at that point too, I think he wants this Bay Area sports fans to be remain spoiled. I think we have a blessing here. We still have Steph. We might get Clay back. We still have Draymond, and we got in our organization we got some dogs, man. I mean. Kuminga, amazing. And I think the most underappreciated guy on the roster is Moody also. I think if we keep him around, and I don't know how much we're going to ship off, but I think if we shell out a little bit for an all-star, I think it's doable, but not everybody. But it looks like Clay might not stick around. But I don't know what you guys think what is actually going to happen. But I think it's either an all-star or they kind of let this thing ride into the sunset and start fresh. But I don't think they're going to sell off.
Nick, I'm totally with you on that. It is an interesting question. I mean, we do love predictions in sports media. What do you think is going to happen? Forget for a moment what we want or what we're hearing. How do you think this is going to play out?
I think that they're going to trade Jonathan Kuminga.
Really?
Yeah, I think Kuminga gets traded. I think they trade Kuminga and they find a taker for the Chris Paul contract, and they bring in one of these $45 million a year guys. I do think that they are dead set on getting Paul George, and I think that Kevin Durant would be not plan B, but plan 1A if Kevin Durant's available. I would predict that they land either Paul George or Kevin Durant. Hell, both. Not both, but I that's my prediction.
All right.
I think that they're going to, even if it costs them more than they want to spend, I think they look at it and they see Jonathan Kuminga as he's a good player. He's a great player. He might be an all-star someday, but it's the Steph Curry window. And to bring in Paul George or Kevin Durant, I think is worth more now than Jonathan Kuminga would potentially be worth in 3 to 5 years.
I have a very different spin on what I think is going to happen. I think what you're saying is plausible. I think that they're going to try. I think that it is, at the risk of sounding like Mike Dunleavy, I think it is hard to pull these things off. And I would predict that the Warriors end up not getting one of those done. So Durant.
No big fish?
Not one of those three. Listen, there are
Durant, Butler, George.
Right.
That's the three. Okay.
I will argue that they will not come away with one of those three. But I think that there are other fish. There are other fish laying in the weeds. I do think the Warriors are absolutely set on offering Steph Curry and the fan base something. So there will be changes. There absolutely will be additions, but they may end up being in a different direction. And they may end up being B+ level names as opposed to A+ level type names. I think that there's so much that we don't see around the corner. And I'll just give you an example. I don't think this player is going to end up on the Warriors, but like Anunoby opted out today. He's a free agent. That's something we know the Warriors have been interested in the past. Is there a way? Probably not. Probably just do not have the financial wherewithal. If he's opting out of that contract, that's because he knows he's going to get more, and he's going to get a lot. He might get $30, $35 million a year. So, but I mean, I think that something like that will end up happening, though I do think what you suggest is on the board. I think they're trying, but I very much would predict that Jonathan Kuminga is on this basketball team next year.
Yeah, next week.
Yep.
I mean, 2 weeks from now.
All of them. All the weeks between now and next season.
I think
all of them.
I think that they have been in conversation with the Clippers about Paul George or Paul George's agent. I think that they've talked to Kevin Durant or Phoenix about Kevin Durant. I think they've talked to Miami about Jimmy Butler, and I'm sure that they have a preferred list of these players. And I think as we get closer to July 1st and you start to see where some of these chips may be falling, I think they're going to be ultra aggressive. I just can't help but think about Joe Lacob and the frustration he seemed to be feeling when you got to the end of that play-in game where you go up to Sacramento and you get it handed to you by the Kings, the Adorables, and the beam gets lit and Vivek Ranadive is out there celebrating and dancing at Golden One, and you're thinking, my God, we're a 10 seed. And even if Draymond would have played those games, and darn it, we might have been a 6 seed, and 46 wins is nothing to sneeze at, Steve Kerr. I'm not saying you're wrong, but you're not used to being in this spot. And you look at Steph Curry with 2 more years in his deal. I think you get to this point and you realize it's time to be bold. We can be bold. And I don't know if they're sold on Jonathan Kuminga being a transcendent superstar of the future.
Well, here's the thing about Kuminga, though. You talked about Joe Lacob being angry. Just because he's angry doesn't mean he can get something done. You need playing partners. You need the players to want to come. You need the team to want to trade him to you. All of those things. We also know that Joe Lacob and the rest of the Warriors franchise, we've heard this a number of times, does not want to be known as the franchise that keeps taking players in the first round and then giving up on them prior to even starting their next contract, if there is one. Jordan Poole signs the contract, but he's dealt. James Wiseman, they give up on him.
Wow.
I know he's not good. I'm not saying they should have stayed with him, but the point is that's a bad precedent to set around the league, which is draft people in the lottery and then kick them to the curb. And so now we get to Kuminga and Moody, and if you're going to start moving off of those guys too, I think you really do you run the risk of being the team that doesn't develop young players, which has already been an accusation centered on Steve Kerr and the Warriors organization for a while. I don't very much buy it at this point, but it would be a stigma. I really do. And so I'm not saying that they won't trade Kuminga, but my God, they're going to have to be blown away. They're going to have to feel so good and so excited about what's coming back in return for them to do that. I've heard at least a few people in the know put the word like untouchable or as close to untouchable as possible while still being touchable. Like they don't want to do that. And,
right.
and even an angry Joe, I don't think does that.
But if it is the difference between getting Paul George or not getting Paul George, I think he becomes less untouchable. He becomes more touchable. And yes, the whole idea of developing young players, whether or not you believe that to be a thing or not, if Steve Kerr's not here in 2 years, if he really is 2 years and done, and Steph Curry has 2 more years, and Draymond's got 2 and a player option, and Wiggins, he may be dealt, but he's only got 3 more years. So it may be a moot point about this regime and whether or not they can develop young players, because this regime might be gone by the time the Poughkeepsie kid is even 24.
That's just Steve. That's not Dunleavy. That's not Lacob. That's not the other Lacob. None of those guys are going anywhere.
But those guys don't have to worry about the stain of development. It's a Steve Kerr.
Oh, sure
thing.
they do.
I
don't agree with that at all.
Mike Dunleavy's been on the job for a year, so you can't say anything about whether or not he can develop young players or not. He hasn't had a chance to.
Not yet, but that's the point. And the organizational structure, like Dunleavy just stepped up to the next job. Like a lot of these people have been in place for a while. This is Joe Lacob's regime. These are his people. And so their fingerprints are all over all of these first-round draft picks. And it's been a while since the Warriors picked one, developed him, re-signed him, and kept him. Like, it's been a while.
Yeah, Steph and Clay would be the last ones. I think Kevon Looney was technically a first-round pick.
Right. But I mean,
not in the lottery, though.
I really think that there's two pieces to the idea of trading Jonathan Kuminga. There's the obvious stuff. There's the player. Do we like him? Do we want him? But there's also there's an emotional piece to a message that would be sent to the rest of the league that they don't want to send. I don't think they want to send that message. So I think
that's more of a fan chatter. And I think that ultimately, if you are the front office and you're Joe Lacob, you would rather chase a fifth ring than worry about the narrative that you can't develop young players and you've got an old core anyway. And we know that the old core has not shown a general love, and they haven't been thrilled with playing with these young players who aren't good enough to hang with them.
I don't know if Kuminga necessarily falls into that too much, at least not last year.
Last year, he took a huge step forward, but the Jordan Poole truculence and the way he behaved was, and I know he was an extreme case, but
good Lord.
James Wiseman and his inability to be a professional.
He's just not very good basketball.
Why did they love the Poughkeepsie kid so much last year? Because he came in with swagger, and he came in with basketball IQ, and he came in ready-made. And the same thing with the 25-year-old rookie, TJD, 24, whatever, you get the point. He came in as a grown man. So it's different than, Jonathan Kuminga, who they've really had to be patient with, and they had to nurture him. And last year, he only got elevated because Draymond couldn't control himself. That's when he became a starter, and that's when his minutes exploded.